Hi everyone, James here from Linode. Thanks for watching. This is the first in a number of chats with MSPs who work with Linux and cloud technologies. And the aim of this series is really just for you to learn from their experiences as the Linode partner audience. So today we've got a very special guest with us, Wim Kerkhoff at Crafty Penguins. Now, Wim and I had a chat a few weeks back, and it was such an interesting one. I was kicking myself for not having said, can we just do this recorded in the first place? But thankfully, he's agreed to come back and have a chat with me. So without further ado,
Hello, good to be here and dig into these things again. So thanks for having me on,
absolute
James.
Pleasure. And you're a really interesting MSP as far as I'm concerned, because you do something quite different to other ones, right? So there's often this kind of, there's this, I wouldn't say a battle, but a difference in approaches with MSPs. You either go down a Windows route or you go down a Linux route. And you went, no, I'm going to do both. Can you tell us a little bit about why?
I guess both have been in my blood always, right? Like as I was a kid, I grew up with, my parents had like a 486 computer, P100, all those things, and running DOS and Windows 3.1, so I learned on the Windows. And as I got into high school, I got into learning Linux, got introduced by a student in grade 11, fellow student, and that was my first job, was Linux programming development. So and I really got a taste for it back then, and Windows is around. In a lot of ways, it's a necessary evil, but it's also the best tool for the job, and for many environments, Windows is the best. But for development and networking and so many places, Linux is just great to work with. So I've had a love and a knack for both. So that's kind of a bit of why.
And so, as a business, how are you structured then? So, are you literally in the same building, or and you just offer different disciplines, or how's your business set up? And I think that's not the only one, is it? You've got two companies there, but you've got some other ventures as well, which you're welcome to mention.
Yeah, I got three businesses. We'll focus basically. It's two MSPs now, and so I started 15 years ago under my own name, own brand, Kerkhoff Technologies, and we've done Linux and Windows since the beginning. But like the first couple of years, I hired a bunch of people I went to school with. We had done our bachelors together, and a bunch of smart guys, and everybody did everything. But a couple of years in, I realized as they moved on, because they couldn't succeed doing everything, a bit of development, bit of Linux, bit of Windows, and I realized we needed to specialize. People full-time on Linux, full-time on Windows. But until recently, it's still one legal entity. 5 years ago, we came up with a different brand, because I realized it needed its own website, its own skill set, its own team. So we've been splitting that out, and then this year it'll be a separate legal entity as well. That's our project this summer, is splitting our QuickBooks and accounting and banking and where people pay, all of that. Because it's the same business model, recurring revenue, managed services, monthly agreements, there's projects. You manage tickets, we use the same ticket system, but it's two different markets. Same culture in terms of core value and who we look for. We spend a lot of time on core values, but it's different skills, technologies, mindset on that. So we've been splitting that out, and that's been working really well. Each has its own vision, its own mission, its own business plan. They're each a team of like 8-9 engineers, and growing.
That's really interesting. So in terms of the way that you said there's quite a few similarities there. In terms of the services that you offer, how do those differ then? Because I always think of sort of maybe the Windows services are more standard SMB, Microsoft Teams, staff productivity, does that differ on the Linux side? Or are you doing exactly the same thing there?
Very, very, very different, yeah. Because the Windows MSP is really, it's a Microsoft 365 management. There's more hardware in there. We may sell, for some clients, we do the on-site support, so there is hardware in there. Some clients are co-managed IT, so we work with an IT manager. He manages all the Windows desktops. We may do the servers and the firewall, but it's all the typical backing up servers, security, helping them with 2FA, best practices, migrating from, let's say, Dropbox to SharePoint or OneDrive. To us, it's SharePoint. Just all the standard things there on that Microsoft side. And on the Linux side, we don't do any hardware. We're not reselling any software or hardware. It's all services. So there's a monthly package for proactive maintenance, managing servers. I don't think there's any clients where we actually manage their desktops, unless it's kind of like a hosted desktop, special purpose graphics or something. But for the 99%, it's all managed servers, Debian, Ubuntu, CentOS. There's Docker, there's Kubernetes in there. So we're going in, doing monitoring, the patching, checking logs. There's things we do every month on their behalf, making sure there's a human aspect we do, just standard operating procedures we run there to make sure they're secure and high uptime. Try to find issues before they crop up. Like if a server, we know if a server has been up for like 3 years, 4 years, and you reboot it for a new kernel update, good chance it's not going to come back because something broke or it's going to check the file system or so yeah, keeping up with reboots, patching, security, and then monitoring. So if it is down, we get the alerts and deal with it on behalf of our client. Some of our clients are paying for like a 24 knock offering. So our guys are on call, guaranteed 1 hour response. If we don't respond quickly, then we give money back. Never had to pay that yet because we got checks and balances, but so the monitoring. And then there's help desk of DNS. The client has a new developer. Typical client is they've probably got some sort of custom code that either they've built in-house or with a contractor, or maybe they're running like a Moodle, a WordPress, a Magento, some sort of open source application. There's dozens, as you know. Some of them are community. Some are they could have paid support with that vendor. But they need somebody on the operations side taking care of it.
Is there a particular focus at all there? So you mentioned some of the applications there. Is there any, looking at your customer base, is it mostly like half WordPress or is it just a total mix?
There's a lot of WordPress, but it's pretty broad. And that's sort of the nature of Linux. It's been sort of the double-edged sword is, the nice thing of Linux is you can do so many things. Like it runs on all our Android phones, is like a Linux kernel. Like it runs everywhere. So many places you wouldn't imagine. Like on your little webcams and streaming music device, it's everywhere. There's so many ways to use it. So that's the beauty. But it's also, if you're looking at a business environment, everybody's using it differently. Even if it's WordPress, they're doing different things. It's not necessarily a Apache MySQL like it used to be. It could be Nginx. It could be running on Lightspeed. There's all sorts of variants of that. So that's been a challenge to develop a model that we can standardize the service and scale it out. So it's not 3-4 engineers each doing it their own way. Yeah, there's a way of deploying it. One is doing Docker, one's doing traditional LAMP, one's doing some other way. Like that's got to be standardized so that the whole team can support the client. It's done the same way and it's automated. The way we get efficiencies as we add clients, even though they may have different applications, that we still get efficiencies. There's still automation or standardization. It's really key for managed services to have profitable agreements is standardization. So if you lose that one engineer who's got everything in his head, what next? It should be that, no problem. Team's got it.
Yeah, so it's documented. They're all well versed in the same thing, and that's where as you say, it's where the efficiency comes from. And on that same note, are you looking for a specific type of customer? Then is there kind of that you know kind of there's some commonality across that helps you build that efficiency? Or
yes, we want them to obviously be. We've seen that the really small ones where they just got one WordPress website and not making a whole lot of money. They're probably not going to meet our minimum because we're like to do well with our model. We need at least $750 a month.
Okay.
Yeah, just with everything we do. Like we don't sell this cheap. Like there's no market in cheap. So it's doing a really good service. So there's a minimum there. Some of the high volatile startups don't do that well because they grow and they run out of money or they outgrow us and then they hire their own DevOps team, SysOps team. But we like it when they realize their core value or their core business and they're clear on that. Because they could be a bank, they could be a SaaS app, they could be an ISP, but they realize their core business is that and they shouldn't be managing servers. And they don't want to be building out a team because it's hard to find a good, serious, solid level 3 engineer who can do all these things and be stable, like not leave after a year or two. That's really hard to find. And they're like, it's worth paying the money to have somebody manage it. It's done professionally. Like security is a big issue nowadays. You can't fool around with that. And that bar is going up all the time. There's more regulation, more compliance, more industry pressure on that. And pressure from end clients on tech providers of you got to be ISO compliant, SOC, all these things. So that's where they bring us to be able to check off all those boxes as well. So we've had clients come and say we've been hacked and our PCI compliance is at risk and we can't process credit cards. We need to up our game. We can't be getting hacked. We need the monitoring. We need the best practices. We need to be upgraded. We got old crappy Ubuntu or CentOS. Please stabilize it and fix it and take care of us so we can focus
Just take
on the
away
code.
that headache. Yeah, I really like that. So that's an interesting point, actually. So I've read different reports on this, and I know different companies sort of require a different level of kind of access and stuff. So without getting too granular, I mean, what is there somewhere, like, where do you draw the line? So do you have a specific package and you say, right, okay, that's what we do and no more? And I know some developers like to have certain levels of access. Do you just offer one blanket offering and that's it, and this is what you get? That's how you work with us?
No, we have 4 levels of 4 offerings, so I can take
Yeah,
you through
that'd
it.
be great. Yes, if you could. Yeah.
So there's so we call it the whole family is TLC, and we do that in the Windows MSP as well. It's called TLC. It's a spin on, you could say it's technology loving care. It's a spin on the old saying of tender loving care. So that's the whole pay. If you're on TLC, that means you're on a monthly agreement. Then the basic plan for Crafty Penguins is we monitor the host only. There's basic reporting. It's all automated. We're not doing any manual checks. Our engineers aren't logging in every month or every quarter. So basic reporting, basic monitoring. We're going to make sure you're patched. Document it. We're on call. It's a basic offering. I can't remember the exact number, but call it 100, 120 bucks a server or something.
Feel free to share it, by the way. If you've got something you want to show, if you've got the offerings, then feel free to share that up with us.
Don't have it on my fingertips,
That's all right,
but I
no
could
problem.
maybe dig that up. And then the standard one, we add in more detailed monitoring on applications and services. So it could be looking at MySQL databases, Mongo, the list goes on. Monitoring individual things. The basic, we look at disk space, but we might get more custom on the standard package. And then we're going in every quarter to check log files, SSH details. Is there extra SSH keys that should not be there? Is there old accounts there? Is the permissions been messed up? A lot of things we
It's
look
a
at there.
continual process then, this thing. So this is where you want this recurring model. So this is an ongoing thing that you charge for. It's not a project.
Yeah, maybe all monthly, yeah. And that's the MSP model, is that you, as a business, you want to be profitable from your recurring revenue alone. So the first day of the month, you should be covering at least all your expenses, maybe even some of your profit. And then any projects you do is sort of the
And you
gravy.
mentioned the $750. That's $750 as an entry point, and that's kind of that gives you.
Yeah, whether you got 1 server or 5, we do 750 as a minimum.
So you know straight away.
So we have clients that are like, we want this. We've only got 1 server. It's a single WordPress website, but it's important enough to pay the $750.
And I guess that's a good filtering process, right, for the type of clients that you're looking for. Yeah, okay, that makes total sense.
So yeah, we have a standard package, and then we also do quarterly meetings. So get on Zoom, look at their best practices, what's going on in their business, their world, or do they have staff coming or going? Do they have new initiatives? How are things working out? Go present our recommendations, and then go from there. So it's kind of a quarterly sprint, just having that dialogue, be proactive on the relationship. So that's important for us, is not just being the ambulance chaser, not just dealing with out of disk space and the bad stuff, but be ahead of that. So, and then on the highest package would be the high security offering, where it's more that they need compliance and detailed reporting on what files are changing, what packages are coming and going. That's just high level security. We've got a package for that. So we've launched that. That's been really successful as well. And then we do a help desk offering, where this is kind of more of a lot of the Windows MSPs have that, is like an all-in help desk offering. So we've applied that to this Linux situation, which is pretty unique because we're not managing desktops or users really. So it's priced per server as a help desk offering, which I haven't seen anybody else do. And the idea is any of the routine business as normal stuff we'll cover. Like you got a developer coming or going, we'll set up their accounts, onboard, offboard, push out their SSH keys to all the servers so they have access and they can do their job. And DNS changes, just all those regular small things that are, let's say, under half an hour, an hour's worth of effort. We'll just do flat fee in the agreement. And then there's the 24/7 offering, which is an optional thing. So if you don't do 24/7, then you get 8 to 5 support. We'll respond to alerts during the day. We'll deal with your emails and your phone calls during the day. But if your application is mission critical, then pay the extra and we'll set up the monitoring on those core mission critical services. So it might not be the dev servers, but all the production and So if it's down, we get an alert. It goes to our call center. They call the on-call engineer and pass it on. So that's a additional offering as well that the ISPs go for, the banks go for. Anybody with mission critical, they're doing 24/7 operations. Then they invest in that. So it's basically there's three main packages, and then there's those add-ons. So they could do a basic package plus the help desk and the 24/7 if they wanted.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that sounds really well organized. Like you've got something there for every different tier of requirement. That's really good.
It was more complicated several years ago. We had all these considerations. We actually call them considerations of complexity and all that. And then we realized it was so hard to explain to prospects. So we simplified it to this model, and they love it. So basically, in a sales conversation, we're walking them through that pricing matrix, as well as the CP way, the Crafty Penguins way. Like, how do we bring on a client? So we have a visual. That's basically our proven process, which we get from, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of proven process, but if you've read or followed the Traction EOS, like it's what I run my business on. Like if I look at, I got behind here, I've got the Traction book cover.
That's
black cover with the orange title, Traction EOS. That's our Bible, basically, for the business of how you structure accountability chart, the roles, the vision, all of that. Traction Entrepreneur Operating System. So just like your computer has an OS, Windows or Linux or Mac, your business needs an OS. So that's what we run on. And one of the components is having a proven process for working with clients. So that's our CP way. We start with that sales call, get on the same page, see if we're a fit. Then there's a discovery project, which the client pays us for. That's a minimum of 15 hours, a prepaid retainer, 15 hours. And it could be more. If they've got 80 servers or 50 servers, we've charged 50 or 60 hours for that, where we go in, talk to them, get access to their cloud accounts, wherever they are, and log in the servers, do a health check their patch levels, everything, and then give them a report where they're at and what we recommend and what's it going to take to come on board.
That's really good that you've got that process down. And I think all the better MSPs seem to have that, right?
That was a breakthrough.
To have that structured approach.
Yeah. And that's really helped us because there used to be, like Richard, one of my guys, he's actually been here with me for 11 years. We'd sit there and noodle together, like, how are we going to price this and write something up? And we think it's going to take about 12 hours a month, so let's go times 150 or whatever, and that's going to be their number. Well, you can't scale that. You can't train somebody else on a gut feel. And then everyone's priced differently, and you're like, what's the price for another server or a dev server or a redundant server that's kind of identical to the primary? Like, how do you deal with that? So this is all cut and dried. We can present that in a half an hour and get a decision the same day.
Yeah, I mean, you've taken a few minutes there to explain the full price list, so that I can definitely see that. So it's on that same note then, when it comes to explaining this and who you're actually working with, who is it within the businesses that you're talking to? So is it always the decision maker straight away, or are you on a daily basis talking to the devs, a mixture of both? Like, who is it you're kind of accountable to, I suppose?
So if they're a larger client, like they've got 50 plus staff, it'd be some sort of middle management. It'd be like a CTO, IT manager, and some sort of director. Not the end developers, because they don't really think business that way, typically. It'd be some sort of team lead, manager, leader, but not the CEO or the CFO either, unless they were smaller. But typically they're technical enough to have a conversation and share what's going on. They know how many servers they got. Well, actually, I take that back. A lot of times the clients don't know how many servers they got. Like, nobody in their team knows how many servers.
And they're not always physical, so that makes it even more difficult.
Actually, they're rarely physical, a lot of virtual. And they're like, we know it's an Amazon. There's a list there, but we don't know. This is from some previous developers, and there's a dev and a legacy, but we don't know what to turn off, so it's all kind of sitting there. So that's part of the discovery project, is kind of auditing that and seeing what needs to stay. That's why it's hard to price out their monthly agreement until we've done the discovery.
Actually, that makes total sense.
And even then, sometimes we do the discovery, and then we need to onboard them, do the stabilization project to really know what's the best final configuration. But often we can save them money. We're like, hey, you've got 20 servers now, but really once we're done cleaning it up, it's going to be 10.
Well, that's hugely attractive, isn't it? So what happens then? So how do these people find you, and what's the thing that tends to prompt them into coming to look for you then, as someone who can help?
They find us searching, like Linux server management, Linux managed services.
Realize?
So it's
they
all
just realize they need that, do they? They just realize, okay, this is getting overwhelming, or
a lot of times the team change. Somebody got a promotion, or they realize they should be writing code and not managing servers. They're not getting traction on their code, or they're best somewhere. So it's all mostly people.
It comes back to that consistency thing, doesn't it?
Often it's the developers doing it, and they've got to get out of it, managing servers. It's grinding them down. So it comes down to roles. I would say, like we're in the people business, not so much tech. That's where my mindset is at.
Good segue.
So yeah, the companies you asked about who's reaching out, and it's mostly larger companies. There's banks. We're getting these larger and larger opportunities, like these billion-dollar organizations reaching out because they may even have a team of Linux engineers but focus on something else, and they're like, "You guys manage the Linux servers. We're going to do the new build." So there's one client. They had 80 servers. They're moving into, I think it was to Amazon. They're like, "Yeah, we've got our legacy platform. You guys manage that so we can focus on the migration, and this will be a 1 year or 2 year plan." So it's kind of unique, but still the bread and butter is Linux, kind of the Apache MySQL PHP stack, and then there's the Python, everything else.
Any specific projects that stand out that you can think of that are interesting ones, or maybe typical? So I mean, if people are if somebody's watching this and thinking, okay, what sort of projects should I be on the lookout for? Maybe I could start looking at potentially. Is there anything that you think stands out as one that's interesting or comes up a lot?
I find that most of the companies who come to us, they already have their Linux servers. So they're not really coming and saying, "Can you do this or that?" They're like, "We want it managed," and then we get to see that, oh, it's messy and it needs like a rebuild because it's been kind of patched together, duct tape and band-aids over the years. So yeah, just stabilization, best practices. How do you standardize it? That's a big project focus. There's a migration between cloud providers because they're paying too much for bare metal somewhere. So move to cloud or VPS. That's actually been a while where clients have had servers in their own office or they're self-hosting. That's kind of like a 10, 20 years ago. You don't run into that.
It feels like
anymore.
that, doesn't it? You'd think that, but it seems like it's not always the case, actually. But yeah, it's definitely obviously a big trend in moving to the cloud, which you guys should be helping with.
Yeah, we've helped clients just move from, they're overpaying for dedicated servers with one of the big hosting providers and move to a smaller cloud provider and save a lot of money and get higher performance. So they're cutting their spend and they're getting more performance. There's that. A big project we're doing is, we call it HAMS. It's like high availability MySQL something. I don't know, the developers came up with this name, and it's a lot more than that, but it's a blueprint with automation and documentation for deploying them with redundant MySQL as the one part, redundant Ceph as the storage, and that's even geographical redundancy in there, and then redundant web servers and the redundant HA proxy load balancer in front of it with redundant DNS with something like a Cloudflare. And that sort of blueprint is like really popular. When we explain it, because we have a nice network diagram, they're like, "Oh yeah, we need this." And they jump into that. So we can do that because it's packaged up now as a kind of a standard project. We can do that flat fee and so we do that. The flat fee to set it up, and then there's the monthly server management.
Is that the first one of that type? Is that the first one that you've sort of solution packaged? Is that the first one that's great? Okay.
Yeah. That's sort of a family. It is to plug in more and more products into that stack of whether it's Redis or I don't know. There's so many things that can be plugged in there where we have all the automation and we can deploy it. It's like all done with Salt Stack. So having all the templates, the formulas to deploy that quickly. With all in, right? With the monitoring, the management, the documentation, that we can do that, let's say in a day would be the goal. Full infrastructure with their application tied in there. So that's been really compelling for them as well because people want the redundancy and rather than spending money in the hardware is put it into a really good design. So in the old days, you'd spend like literally $250,000 on the big iron for something that's not going to go down, right? All the triple power supplies, all of that. Well, we don't do that anymore. It's just like just get extra cheap VPSs and
it's the resiliency, the design that kind of sells it. Yeah, that makes sense. On that note, when you're talking about so the platforms, when you're presenting the platforms, how does that work in terms of what you present for the customer? Do you just always go with a default offering, or do you say, hey, you've got two offerings here, you've got like the alternative cloud, you've got the hyperscalers? How do you position it for customers?
guess the answer goes back to the nature of Linux is that it's open source, so you can run on any hardware you want. Like it doesn't need to be Apple's hardware. It doesn't need to be anybody's hardware. And that's sort of been my position on that. It's like I'd hate being tied into any vendor. So I've always taken a vendor agnostic approach. Is even when it was bare metal, is use something that's going to work well with Debian, and we don't need to not forced to run Red Hat because it has better drivers. So that's even with these in today is with cloud is not getting too tied into one vendor's stack. We don't want to be so deep into Amazon that we can never move the client off. So the way we deploy, like just what I talked about with this whole redundant web storage load balancer framework, is that we can deploy it to anywhere. It can be running virtually in your desktop in Docker or virtual machines, or it could be run in Linode, it could be run on Amazon or Azure or a mix. That can be sitting across multiple cloud platforms for those benefits. So that's been our strategy: is host you anywhere and make it so we could pick up our toys and go somewhere else on a whim if we needed to. So if there's a vendor relationship goes sour, no problem. We'll just move it somewhere else. Update DNS.
Yeah. It's about thinking about that ahead of time, isn't it? Really, rather than building it all and then realizing actually
you got to design for it
from the beginning.
You can't add it, right? So if you've gone serverless and deep into the Amazon's Docker integration and leveraging S3 and everything else, like how do you move it? A lot of companies have no idea because they've leveraged to move quickly, which is a benefit. They move really quickly, buying into all these things that look cheap, but they lock you in, and they could be more expensive long term. Just been our position on that, and that's actually resonated well with our clients. Is that we put that actually right in our one-page vision is target markets, people who want to have control of their infrastructure. And that could be, it could be in their closet, it could be servers they rent and they co-locate, it could be in a VPS, but stuff that they're paying the account, they got access, they got the data, they got the applications, it could be moved. So it could be cloud hosted as somebody else's hardware, but we still got the control on monitoring and backups, and we're not
and ultimately the buck stops with you, right? So the last thing you want is to be in a position where you've got to try and answer these questions where you've got an issue with a provider or whatever, being able to move, being able to be flexible. That's important for you too. So that's really interesting. So just in terms of, I know obviously you offer sort of DevOps services. I'm quite interested in what your thoughts are on sort of the future of MSP, where DevOps fits in. We hear a lot of MSPs looking at ways to kind of differentiate themselves. So it looks, a lot of people look like they're doing the same thing. You go to a lot of MSP websites, they're offering similar things. And DevOps, this kind of opportunity to get into managing cloud platforms and supporting that DevOps way is kind of seems to be something that's going to be really important in the future. Do you have any thoughts on kind of what people should be looking at basically in terms of DevOps skills or skills for the future to basically put themselves in a better position in their MSPs?
Yeah, so there's 3 or 4 parts to that answer. I am obviously a big fan of DevOps, of having been a developer. That's something I got into like 20 years ago, is DevOps. It's not a new concept, but how do you automate your builds and package it up and automated testing, continuous integration. So it's not a new concept. It is something as a service provider, or as Crafty Penguins, we got into maybe 5-6 years ago, is helping our clients implement DevOps, CI/CD and Jenkins and all those wonderful things. But we found like those are great projects and they were profitable, but it wasn't good for our business because it was all like feast or famine. We'd do this 200-hour project, train their team on how to run it, and then there would be no recurring out of it. Because the DevOps way is that your developers really own it. They're defining what the infrastructure looks like. So it's blurred the lines between dev and operations. So you got your pipelines and everything, but you got the idea of infrastructure as code. So your developers are writing Docker templates, and they're packaging it, and they're testing it, and they're dealing with it. And yeah, there's still an ops component. So we found that we had to pivot away from the DevOps focus. So we'll help with it, but it's we're not interested in one-off projects because it doesn't help us, doesn't help our valuation, nothing. So we don't, as a Linux company, we support it, we encourage it, embrace it, but it's not our number one bread and butter. It's just there was no good business model on that for recurring. On the Windows side, Doing that in the Windows world alone, there are tools in Azure, there's pipelines and stuff. We've never gotten into that. We don't understand that world at all. So we actually don't do anything DevOps on the Windows side. It's a very different mindset from what your typical Windows technician engineer does. They're thinking servers, they're thinking patching, their security. So we haven't gotten too far with that. But I would say if you look at expand bigger picture from DevOps is what are we talking about? It's really flow and how do we automate that and streamline that and break down the steps and optimize the steps. It's sort of the agile lean thinking behind that. So we're applying that thinking in our business with tools like Kanban. So we manage majority of our work, we don't do a dispatch model, it's a Kanban model, continuous flow. Work comes in, it flows through, minimizing the work in progress. And that's part of the DevOps way is reduce how you increase your throughput on your work, whether it's project or help desk or whatever it might be, is break down the steps, reduce the work in progress, keep it flowing left to right. And that's, we've actually gone so far as we've created our own Kanban product to visualize our work, and we're selling that to MSPs around the world. So it's called Top Left. So that's the third business, It's Top Left. It's all about flow, reducing the work in progress, real-time time entry, visualizing the work, seeing the bottlenecks, see who's overloaded. And that's really helping with mental health, reducing overwhelm.
Is that any task in the business, right? We're talking about here. And that's okay.
Any task, sales activity, admin task, whatever it might be, projects, onboarding, proactive, everything, every ticket in the software would be in there, and it's an add-on for. There's 2 PSAs. That's a professional services automation. MSPs should know those. And 2 big players are Autotask and ConnectWise. So we're supporting both of those now. So we sit on top of that. And the idea is to quickly visualize what's going on and start getting improvements without having to rebuild your whole PSA. Like switching PSAs is a lot of work. So we take the data out and visualize it using tech tools inspired by DevOps and Agile. So we've got almost a couple hundred MSPs on that around the world, and that's been growing and doing well. So that's the third company.
That sounds really good. I think we're going to have to maybe have additional sessions with you, Wim, at some point. So maybe you can run us through how that works. It'd be interesting for our audience, I'm sure, to see it. So I'll get on to how they can find out more about that in a second. But just quickly before we, it's probably time to wrap up. But perhaps you could give us an idea of kind of the things that MSPs maybe should be looking at. Let's just say we've got an MSP who's maybe dabbled with Linux, has some expertise there, and has thought about going into a similar model as yourself, so with the sort of more the platform management services and the tiered packages that you offer. What sort of cloud skills should they be looking at? What do you see as the sort of the big ones for the next sort of the coming years, and how should they be finding their way into that space?
I knew that question was coming. Because you prepped me for that, but I don't have a good answer because there's such a breadth of skills. There's a big corpus of knowledge there required and experience. So
a good place to start. Are there any technologies you think, okay, this one's really booming and it's something that a lot of companies need, or is it because there's such a combination? Does that make it difficult?
There's so many things. I'll take it back to what do we look for in a new engineer? How do we train them? So we actually. Several years ago, we came up with what we call like the baby Crafty Penguins training plan. So if they come on board, or actually even before they want to come on board, if they're interested in a position but they don't have the skill level, then what training do we give? So it's something like 100, 200-hour project, sort of a lab thing, very hands-on learning of set up the virtual machines, create a web server, create a database, maybe run WordPress. We do like set up a virtual firewall with like IP tables. So you figure out some NAT and address translation and how do you do the basics there. Running some OSPF or BGP in there so you understand the routing. Because a lot of people don't understand their networking and TCP versus UDP. So we force them to learn that. Having an internal DNS going, or maybe set up a public domain on it. Run this in the cloud somewhere perhaps with like $5 VPS instances. Like run this, show how it works. That you know how to secure SSH. You kind of give them a whole lab environment. Set this up, and then so they go. So it's probably missing some of the newer technologies. I don't think we had HA proxy in there Kubernetes is sort of, we make sure people learn the basics on that. So we basically, the first 3 months that people have with us, it's like pure familiarization. Even if they've got like 10, 20 years of experience, we're still giving them 3 months of shadowing, hands-on. You got to do these projects on company time. We'll pay you for it, for learning that. So there's, but if somebody's got like no Linux, that's a big learning curve. So if they're a Windows shop and like, hey, we want to add Linux as a line of business, then you got to put in several years. You got to put in the 10,000 hours to get there. There's no shortcut on that. Or you got to hire the engineers who can do it, and then you need not just one person but a team. So you got to, I think, integrating it in your Windows team will never work. Like, it can't be off the side. It's got to be dedicated. It's a serious commitment. So yeah, there's a market for it because it's showing up in all sorts of places. But I talk to, obviously, like literally hundreds of Windows MSPs, and they all struggle with Linux. It's because they'll have a client with maybe 50 desktops and like 5 or 10 Windows servers, and there's that orphaned, neglected, abandoned 1 or 2 Linux servers that some developers set up years ago to run a WordPress or some custom PHP app they wrote for the business, and the Linux MSPs just, they don't touch it, or they'll monitor it. If it doesn't respond to ping, they'll get an alert and they'll do a break fix on it. And they might have like a co-founder or a CTO who's got the experience, but nobody else in the team. So they'll kind of even undersell it in the sales conversations. They're like, yeah, we could take this on, but we know we're not going to give this best experience, so let's not sell it. So I've been in rooms with hundreds of MSPs, and there might be like 2 of us that actually do Linux properly. Sorry, it's not really encouraging on how to get into that, but it's an opportunity.
I think you painted a good picture there. I think you painted a good picture because I think you're showing that there is a big opportunity there, but it's clearly not something that you just kind of do on the side. So you really do have to say, right, I'm going to gear up for this as kind of, this is part of our future strategy, right? So yeah, I think that's absolutely fine.
Probably you'd have to hire, if you want to get into it and productize it and sell it well, be able to stand behind it, considering security, because that's one of the top things nowadays for anybody. Yeah, you can't fool around. You either got to hire the talent or really invest into learning it. So sending somebody, there's tons of courses online, Linux Academy, there's so many things out there. Some vendor training, which there's a lot. I guess they do one thing. If somebody really wants to get into Linux and they haven't got their mind into it, like how all the components work under the hood, the number one thing I've always recommended is called the Linux from Scratch book. And I did that, I think like AMD 233, something like that.
Yeah.
Long time ago, a long time ago, where you got your Linux desktop, so whatever, Ubuntu or Gen 2 or whatever your desktop is, and you use that to build Linux from scratch. So you create the compile chains, the development environment, so you can build a new environment, you boot into it, and then you recompile everything in that new environment to optimize it. So this is going from the raw source code, the kernel, bash, GNU, everything you're downloading from source and compiling it with all the configure flags. So this book steps you through all the commands. And that's by far the best way, I think, to learn Linux and how these things fit together.
Just to get a working.
Like, how do the libraries work?
Just get understanding.
What are all these security layers and dynamically linked, statically linked, configuring X desktop, the window environment, everything. And if you do that, you're going to mess it up so bad that you got to start over, and that's where you learn the most, is when you missed that one flag like 3 pages ago, and now you got to roll back and figure out.
Yeah, that's not painting the most positive picture, I have to say. But yeah,
and that's
the
probably
reality, right?
That's maybe like a 20-hour effort. 20-hour effort, which back in the day you had to wait for stuff to compile, and now it's like so fast you can't even go to get a coffee anymore, right? That's
yeah, definitely. We'll put a link to that in the description, definitely.
So happy to continue that conversation. Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's been a fantastic session. I really enjoyed chatting to you, Wim, as always, and I could see there's like a whole number of different topics there. We could probably have like a separate session on with some of the things you cover.
Yeah. Leadership, sales, marketing, like I'm not much hands-on tech anymore. I'm mostly leadership, thinking of more of a CEO and a chairman, and mergers and acquisitions and all sorts of things. So it's been all over.
Yeah,
over the
I'd love to
place.
have some conversations about those things, and particularly sales and marketing. You've got a unique approach there. I won't go into detail now, but check out Wim's blog and some of the ways he presents his company online, and they do a fantastic job with content marketing. Maybe we can chat about that another time. But Wim, where can people find you if they'd like to get in touch, or LinkedIn, Twitter, those kind of things?
LinkedIn is where I really hang out. So just search for Wim Kerkhoff, and you'll see me there. And the three websites, there's kirkhofftech.ca. I'm not going to spell it out here, but you can
We'll
find
put it in the notes, don't worry.
Notes, Crafty Penguins. Crafty Penguins Linux, you'll see there as number 1, number 2, number 3. And then top left Kanban. If you search for top left Kanban, you'll see that Kanban for MSPs.
Wonderful. That's perfect. Thank you very much. Wim, I can't thank you enough for your time. I really appreciate you joining me, and I'm really glad we managed to make this happen. So thank you very much.